Hello and welcome to that Inbox Army podcast, back for season 2. Woo! Season 2. That just means we ran out of last year. I'm your host, Scott Cohen. With me is the Stockton to my Malone, because Utah guy right here. My co-host, Garin Hobbs. Garin, how are you doing today?
It's a new year, Scott. Doing well.
Can we still say that when we're recording in March? That's all right. That's all right. All right.
They don't know.
They don't know. Well, they do now. Today, to launch season 2, as I mentioned, we're keeping it in-house for a discussion on email design. In the guest chair today is George Pettigrew, creative director here at Inbox Army. George, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Scott, Garin. Thank you both for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're excited.
You're here.
But before we get too deep into the weeds, I love to learn about people's journeys, how they ended up where they are now. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up here with us.
Okay. I've been in design for almost 20 years. My parents were designers, just came up doing design, and something I enjoy and love very much. I got into email design, I'll say maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I've always done email design here and there, but it was always like image based. I didn't know what email design was. And I got hired at Smile Direct Club. It was my previous employer. I was hired as an entry-level production email designer. So I came in at the very bottom. You couldn't go any lower. And so I started there, and did that for a while. I would get really frustrated because I would pass off my designs to the development team, and the designs would never look like how I designed them. Spacing, everything would be off. Like, I realized I had no idea what I was doing, and I didn't understand the technical side. So that frustration led me down a road or a path to really understand the fundamentals of email design, not just design, but the technical side of it as well. And so COVID hit, we got furloughed. I was off for 2 months. I actually learned how to code emails during that 2 months. Yeah, it just basic table code structure, just coding an email. So I coded my first email, made it responsive, made it pixel perfect, which is something I was told that couldn't be done. And so my mentality changed, my work process changed. And then what really changed, what was the tipping point, was 19. My company sent me to Litmus in San Francisco. And I heard Crystal Ledesma, I believe is her last name. Scott, I've told you about this before, but she gave a talk on design systems. And it completely, every single pain point I had, she just hit the nail on the head. And so I was hooked. I spoke with her after she gave that talk. And that's been my mentality moving forward. It's like, if you don't have a design, honestly, if it doesn't have a design system, I won't even touch it, because it's just so inefficient otherwise. So anyway, that's how I got to where I'm at. And I'll say this real quick. I know we're going to talk about design systems, I'm sure. But what I love about design systems is it gives you a very objective way to design for email, So, and I'll elaborate on that later, but yeah.
Well, let's elaborate right now on that.
Okay.
I mean, I've called it for years a master email template, but really what I've been talking about is an email design system. I can feel the passion, right? We've talked about it before that plenty of times, but let's dive a bit deeper for the folks that don't fully, might call it a master template, or a lot of people just call an email, yeah, let's just build a template. It's like, well, hold on. Those are two different things. What is an email design system, and why should all brands have one?
Okay. Well, I like to call them modular email design systems. So any design system should be modular in nature. I'll talk about that part or that piece in a second. But essentially, an email design system or a modular email design system is a set of rules or guidelines that standardize your brand's email design. So it not only standardizes your brand's email design, but it standardizes, it keeps your brand consistent across your different marketing channels. So, web, app, social media, you want as much continuity as possible. So design systems help give you that standardization and that consistency, so that everything looks and feels like it's on brand. Like, are you using the same fonts in those different channels, the same colors, right? I've audited a lot of code where I'll see 19 hex values for a light shade of or gray. And it's just, there's no consistency, right? It's just they're almost the same. They're virtually the same, but they're not. So design systems just help, cut out a lot of that stuff. And yeah.
Yeah. I like the stamp you put on it, modular design systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the sort of tacks that I take to help describe that to people is think of it as a collection of 9 different Legos, so to speak, right? And the Legos don't change. They maintain their standards, but you can rearrange these and reconfigure them in almost limitless different ways that give you greater extensibility of application and use, to your point, without having to risk brand standards or without having to risk something not delivering a consistent look, feel, and customer experience. So I like that you really call that out specifically. It's one thing to create a static template. It's another to make it modular and really, again, give it a much longer life cycle and more time on stage. I've really picked up on your passion about design systems since you've been here. I think it's a flag we've all kind of grabbed on and started carrying forward as well. I do, in a lot of my conversations with our own clients and partners here, George, tend to get a little bit of pushback against design systems, right? Some of it's likely due to their lack of understanding. I won't use the word ignorance, but typically the argument I get is you can't be creative within a design system, right? What say you to that?
Oh man, this is something I get a lot. To me, I would say it's an excuse, right? But I think more so, and I hate to say that, but I just like being straight and direct. I think the real issue isn't the design system itself, but rather how people view creativity, right?
Mm.
A design system doesn't restrict creativity, it focuses it. So, especially for something like email design, you really, in order to design for emails, you have to understand the technical side of it. There's no way around it. It's like designing a website. You can't be a UI designer or product designer, honestly, any type of designer, if you don't understand the fundamentals of what you're designing for, right? If you don't understand the user experience, if you don't understand accessibility, if you don't understand different types of users, right? You have people who use screen readers, you have people who are visually impaired, you have people who prefer dark mode. You have all these different types of users that you can't control. The only thing that you can control is your design to conform to your users' expectations.
I really like the angle you're taking here, George, right? It's about how they define creativity, right? Creativity doesn't mean the ability to do everything. It means doing your best within a set and defined structure, right? And you're still have plenty of flexibility there. There's still plenty of freedom, but you don't have to worry about going over the guardrails because they're safely in place. Does that make sense?
It's like, the reason why people feel limited by these design systems or by design systems is because they don't fully understand the fundamentals, like I just said, right? They don't understand the fundamentals of email design. When you don't have a strong grasp of the basic fundamentals in email, like layout, typography, accessibility, like I've mentioned, the system can feel more like a constraint rather than a tool. Right. So, but once you understand these principles, you realize the system enhances creativity. So it allows you to push boundaries with purpose and not just to push them, just to push them. You actually have a structured way of designing. So I would just say those who think that a design system restricts creativity, you just don't understand the fundamentals well enough. And you don't understand the importance of consistency, the value and just honestly the ROI on time saved alone, and especially with a software like Figma, where you can build these design systems and have one person easily manage thousands, hundreds of thousands of assets, it's just insane. It's like, to me, it's a no-brainer. If you don't get it, you don't have enough experience, or you don't have enough frustration, from your experience.
Well, it's sort of like setting up, it's like a blank canvas for artwork, right? For painting. It's got to stay on the canvas.
Coloring inside the lines.
But I mean, that I think, yes, but I'm saying, like, if you have a big piece of canvas, you can do whatever you want within the canvas. But email in particular, and let's dive a bit more. I mean, you talk about the technical pieces here and the technical requirements. You can design anything you want. Email will just go, yeah, we can't handle that. And so it's defeating you will be defeated by not operating within the canvas. And by the way, every canvas will look a little different, whether it's a Microsoft canvas or a Gmail canvas or a Yahoo canvas, a dark mode canvas. We'll talk more about dark mode in a minute. But I think I feel like I'm a big, what's the word I'm looking for here? Metaphor person. And it's like you're yelling about the fact that you have to be contained to a canvas, not about the fact that the canvas is blank.
It's a great summary.
What about the users, right? That's another thing too. People always talk about being creative, but what about designing for your users and the user experience? And then two, in addition to that, when I first started in design and art, whenever I had a blank canvas, and this isn't exactly with what you just said, Scott, but you need some, just follow me if you can. You need some type of grid system to work within, right? Otherwise, or at least for me, with my experience, if I have a blank screen to design on and I don't have a grid, I don't know what to do, right? It's like I get paralysis. But anyway, I just wanted to add that in too, that, yeah.
So what I heard there was design systems don't in any way limit creativity. What they simply do is mitigate or limit, or sometimes in most cases, eliminate the risk of designing outside of technical requirements and recommended best practices. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. Yes.
Now, there's an aspect here that you mentioned, and I want us to unpack that a little bit more. You mentioned accessibility, right? This is something that I've been working to increase my own awareness of. I first heard about accessibility, really started learning about it last year. I saw Sarah Gallardo speak at Gene Jennings' Email Innovation Summit. By the way, great show, great learning opportunities. So definitely take the opportunity to attend.
And a callback, she was on the podcast last season. If you haven't watched the accessibility chat, go check that out.
Great call out. Where I was really stunned was some of the stats she was giving here, right? First off, this is not a nice to have. This is a legal requirement. This is part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Even more stunning, 25, I learned from Sarah, of your likely audience suffers from either some type of visual or cognitive disability. And so accessibility is not pure altruism in terms of making this available to everybody, although there certainly should be that in it. But from the more selfish point of view, from like a brand or a marketer themselves, this is about increasing the size of your addressable audience by adhering to these design principles that were specifically tailored to allow anyone and everyone, or at least the maximum number of people possible, to read, digest, and interact and engage with your email and your content, right? Why is it so important to properly address accessibility in email design, George? I mean, maybe I just took a bit of that from you, but outside of that, I mean, let's chat through some of the reasons why this is so important.
They're endless. They're just endless. Let me think. One, you don't know who your users are going to be, and people who do not have impairments, let's say visual impairments, for instance, sometimes they might have a temporary impairment, right? It's like you break an ankle or something, you have to walk around on crutches or use a wheelchair for a while. You're temporarily impaired or whatever you want to call it. But people just, a big part of being a designer is really understanding cognitive science. That's a big part of it. But I can't say this enough. It's just about designing for human needs and human behavior. Everybody's like, oh, we want to be like Apple. Why do you think Apple is Apple? They make great products, but their products are so great because they focus on the user experience, right? Cutting out all those friction points. And when your designs aren't accessible and things of that nature, you have a lot of friction in your designs, right? So accessibility, for those who don't know, like your font has to be above a certain size in order to be accessible. The color of your font has to have enough contrast when the font is on top of the back, or whatever background is sitting on top of. It has to have enough contrast so that you can visually see it without straining. Another thing too, a lot of people think accessibility is just for people who are disabled or visually impaired or using screen readers. That's not the case at all. A lot of the times, the reason why those standards are in play, or one reason why those standards are the standards that they are, is because they account for situations like where you're out in public, right? You're on your cell phone, you have something reflecting on your screen, right? Like they account for atmospheric, like reflections and stuff like that. Like there needs to be a certain amount of contrast so you can always see your screen, even in like difficult viewing conditions. But the main, it just shows your users that you care, right? You care more about their experience than you do selling a product, or, and of course you want to sell your product. I mean, that's why you're in business. But, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm bragging, but I go to Japan once a year, right? And one thing that blows my mind about Japan is how accessible Japan is. They have this thing called barrier-free entry. So it doesn't matter where you're at. It is accessible for mothers, right? For people who are blind. You can be on the countryside of Japan and you'll see these yellow like grooves on the sidewalks and stuff, and they're made for blind people. And it's just the user experience of Japan. I always equate the design systems that I create to that, or that we create to that. It's just nothing else exists like it is top of the line. It is the gold standard. So I mean, just when your designs are accessible and stuff, it's enchanting to interact with. You know, it's easy to interact with. It's frictionless. Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of rambled, but
no, you did.
I love that correlation. And if you take it a step further, right? Japan does this. One, it's the right thing to do. Two, some very smart people somewhere near the top probably realize that the more you enable your society, the more they produce, the more they're able to live to the fullest, produce to the fullest, and give back and create a much more complete and happy society. That's sort of my takeaway from that.
Yeah, it's so true. So true.
Yeah, I mean, it's not because they have to. It's because, Garin, your point, it's the right thing to do. But also, you increase your access. You talk about you're in business to sell things. You increase your addressable audience, your accessible audience. They have money.
Man.
They'll buy things.
Do you hate money?
Yeah, exactly. I like money. People go, is the juice worth the squeeze? For that, yes, absolutely. Now, there seems to be, let's take accessibility a little bit, this is a cheeky question for this call, but image-only emails seem to be trying to make a comeback. There are some people out there who are going, just be image-only, who cares, right? It's fine, you can blah, 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 blah. What are your thoughts on image-only emails?
Ooh, Scott's poking the bear.
I don't look at image-only emails as emails. I never have. So when I get an email and it's image only, that just tells me whoever designed it has no idea what they're doing. That's how I view it, right? It's not accessible. People with screen readers can't read it. You know, the alt text you make headlines and CTAs and prominent information that needs to render no matter what. This is another thing. I hate image-based emails. I just hate them because people think that's what email is, right? And I strongly advise against that. As a matter of fact, with our design team, like whatever you do not show the client an image-based email. I do not want to set their expectations that this is what this is not at least the brand that I want to help build here at InboxArmy. I don't want it to be image-based. It's just not email design. People don't even think about it. Most of the time, people are going to view your email from a cell phone, which image-based emails are not. Usually they'll take a desktop version and shrink it down on your phone. So it's not responsive design. It's just bad design, right? Because a lot of the fonts are smaller than 14 pixels, which makes it inaccessible. Yeah, and then some of the elements are controlled by live type, and then you have dark mode, which it just looks really bad. But another thing is, like, people are in low network conditions all the time. If we're at home and connected to our fiber and fast internet, of course stuff is going to render instantly. But most people are out in the wild when they view this stuff. If it's not optimized to load instantly, then most people are going to miss your offer before they even see it, right? People do not have the attention span. It's a construct in user experience design called feedback. If you click a button, right? Let's take skeleton screens, for instance. Do y'all know what skeleton screens? Well, you don't have to answer. Skeleton screens, basically, they flash while a page loads. It's giving you immediate feedback to let you know that it's like a low fidelity wireframe. Right. It's feedback, immediate feedback. So if you click a button or you see a little loading icon, that's all feedback, right? It's to let you know that your action went through. If you don't get that immediate feedback, you're going to get frustrated, right? That frustration is the number one cause of user abandonment. So what that means is if I get an image-based email and I look at it and it's just a big blank screen, I'm going to click off of it instantly. I'm not going to wait 30 seconds for it to load. So it's just like, I just don't get it. I just don't understand the whole argument with image-based versus text-based. Again, it's like basketball, you have these basic fundamental rules that you have to follow when you play basketball. Same with email design. Like you can't just come do what you want and then expect it to be, it doesn't work that way, you know?
Yeah, I mean, not to mention folks who have their images turned off in their email, right? They miss the entire experience if you're putting things in email. So it's
more on the B2B side, not as much on the B2C side anymore. Most they'll default you to images on these days. But yes, to your point, screen readers, all those things, alt text. I think there's a character limit on how much a screen reader will read on alt text, I believe, if I remember from what Sarah said in the previous episode. So you can't just hide everything. Oh, we put alt text, it's fine. It's
It's
to a point, yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about dark mode. You've mentioned it several times. It's not quite a 4-letter word yet, or maybe it is. I'm curious what challenges you see in designing for dark.
Yes. So just a few basic rules. In dark mode, usually lighter colors are converted to darker colors and darker colors are converted to lighter colors. So let's say, for instance, if you have an email that's all black, right? Like the backgrounds are black. In light mode, it's going to look fine. But in dark mode, that background is more than likely going to convert to white, right? It's going to look completely different. And most people view emails in dark mode. So you always have to understand those little, like how these different email clients or canvases, like you referred to them earlier, Scott, how these different email engines render your email. They all have different ways of doing it. Some have algorithms, some invert colors. For Apple, there's a code snippet you can put for user prefers dark mode, and you can actually. So when I've built a couple of websites, and when I build websites, what I do is I'll take a primary color, right? And this is a process I got from a book called Refactoring UI. It's from the creators of Tailwind CSS. It's a UI framework. But anyway, they show you how to take a primary color and expand that color palette and create lighter and darker shades. And what I like about their methodology is they don't use opacity, right? And I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but let's follow me if you can. You can't use opacity in email because it doesn't render correctly. You have to use 100% hues, right? So those color palettes are very important. So in dark mode, a lot of times people will just drop the opacity and think that's going to work. But no, that's not the case. When you drop the opacity, you have a lot of issues that it will take an entire new podcast to talk about. But what you do, or what I like to do, is take that primary color, expand it. So I'll create lighter shades and darker shades of that primary color. And in dark mode, I'll use the lighter end of the spectrum. And in light mode, I'll use the darker end of the spectrum. And the reason why is because in dark mode, your background, in theory, should be dark, right? So you're going to need lighter colors on top of it to have enough contrast. This is it's really abstract to explain without showing visuals. I wish I had visuals to show, but that's my take on dark mode. To me, well, that's not my full take. My full take is, my mentality is to make sure your email is 100% accessible in light mode. If it's 100% accessible in light mode, more than likely it's going to be 100% accessible in dark mode. And then you also too have to understand how, like, the technical limitations, right? Let's talk about HTML and table code. So let's talk about websites versus email. In websites, you can use SVGs, right? So you can control the color of your SVGs in code on websites, but in email, you can't. You have to use those SVGs as PNGs. So PNGs are images, which means images do not have color conversion in email. So if you have iconography, for instance, those colors are not going to change in dark mode. They're going to be the exact same. But anything that you have in your design that is HTML, or that's controlled by HTML, so your colors, right, your fonts, the backgrounds, color of your fonts, anything controlled by code will change in dark mode. So you want to be aware of those technical limitations and stuff like that. But again, just make sure your stuff is accessible in light mode. And for the most part, you should be good in dark mode. Yeah, I guess I'll stop.
Talking through things like accessibility, dark mode, email design best practices and principles in general, what are some of the most common mistakes you see designers making in their email designs?
I'm sorry, Garin, can you ask that question one more time?
Yeah, just what are, keeping all of these things in mind, not just dark mode or accessibility, but just basic best practices and principles for email design. What are some of the most common mistakes that you most consistently see designers making in their own email designs?
I think one of the biggest things that I see that annoys the living daylight out of me is designers will space things in fractions. So it'll be like 5.33 pixels of padding in between an element, right? So I always talk about using an 8-point stop. So just a quick backstory. I'm very passionate about bridging that gap between design and development. And that's what I love about design systems. It does that. But one element in a design system is called an 8-point soft spatial sizing system. And that's what you use to space things. So in email design, you have to have a fundamental any UI design, you have to have a fundamental understanding of the box model, right? The box model, everything adheres to the box model. Anything in a UI design is wrapped around, it has a box wrapped around it, right? So you have to understand how padding and spacing affects, how you space elements, like how much space do you have inside of your button on the left, right, top, bottom, And so an 8-point soft spatial sizing system helps designers use basically multiples of 8 to space things. And what it does is it prevents designers from just spacing things in fractions. I don't even know how they space it in fractions. I'm like, how do you even space it in fractions? But that's one of the biggest things. The next biggest thing is accessibility. There's so many times where it's like text is not accessible. And there are tools that you can use to check the accessibility of your text. So accessibility, that's a big one. Touch targets, right? Again, all this stuff is pretty much based off of cognitive science and human behavior, but
let's talk touch targets. What are those?
Yeah, it's basically anything that you click, right? So anything you click, and they're very important on a phone because you're using your thumb to click. So it needs to be a certain size. I want to say Apple says it needs to be at least 44 by 44 pixels. I think that's the baseline. It might be 48 by 48, but it has to be a certain size so you can press it without accidentally pressing something else, like a big point. This is something that's so crazy, and I've seen this a lot.
Thumb friendly.
Fat thumb, or if you're like dyslexic or whatever, your thumb shake or whatever that's called, that's why touch targets exist. They account for different fat thumbs or, nerves. But another thing, I see this, like the unsubscribe button is right beside another button, and it's so small. It's not even a button, it's a text link, but it's so small that you can't click what you want to click without accidentally clicking the unsubscribe button. So this stuff needs to be engineered in a way to where you mitigate as much user error as possible, because you might have people unsubscribe, right? And you might not know why. And it could be something as simple as a touch target size. So it's a lot of other things. I can go on and on about this, but I'll stop there and see if you have any.
I love hearing the standards around touch targets. Scott, I'm waiting for the day we have a client that comes to us and say, we can't understand why our list attrition is so terrible. Is it our offer? Is it our brand? Is it perception of our products? No, it's the fact that your unsubscribe link is too damn close to the CTA button, right? That's the real problem.
I'm old enough to actually have done a successful test where we put the unsubscribe button in the pre-header. The unsubscribe link is like, hey, this is great. You don't want to get this anymore. Do this, because that, if you make it easy,
yes,
it's better than them marking you as spam.
People love to hide those unsubscribe links. They're subscribed to your email for a reason. Like, you do not want to make it difficult for them to unsubscribe.
You get gray, and then it gets to like a really light gray on the background. Yeah.
Or it's buried in some paragraph and not hyperlinked properly, and you.
Or the worst is the cold emails where it's just reply no and I'll leave you alone. Like, I don't want you to know I exist. So no.
Exactly. I'm not validating my email address for you.
No, not at all. All right, well, let's flip it a little bit. What are some of your favorite brands when it comes to great email design?
Apple, of course, Grammarly, Zillow. I love Zillow's because their emails are 100% accessible all of the time. It's like, and Crystal leads there. I forgot what she does, but the Crystal I mentioned earlier leads. She's like I'm not going to say her position because I can't remember, but her and her team does a great job of making Zillow's emails just perfect. I always look at them for inspiration. Airbnb, of course. The one thing I don't like about Airbnb is they bake their top headline into an image. If you look at their email in dark mode, all of the email is like converts except for the logo and the font. It's like a slice, and I'm just
Every
like,
time.
every single. It's the only thing I'm like, can they change that? But then Google, Etsy, they have good ones, and then Udemy. But it's very few people do it right. So I don't have a long list. It's a shame. A lot of opportunity.
That's a great list of folks who are doing it right. Let me flip that on the other side. George, last year I attended a webinar. It was about, best designs in 2024, or most innovative designs. And the more minutes I sat in this webinar, the angrier and angrier I became. Every single example they put up was entirely just shattered all best practices, did not follow, recognized prescription and direction. But the excuse I got was, well, sometimes design has to be first, and sometimes you have to break the rule to, put forth a really innovative and compelling design. Personally, I felt that was BS, but is it BS? When does it make sense to break the rules and disrupt an email design system or the best practices of email altogether?
I feel like if you have a strong understanding of the fundamentals, you can have the best of both worlds regardless. To me, there's never a reason to sacrifice the user experience in the name of creativity. If anything, that shows me, and I talk to my designers or our designers all the time, or the design team that I work with. And one of the guys asked me a question. He was like, why? Well, really good emails says to do it. They said these are the best emails. I'm like, well, you have to be discerning, right? The majority of what you see on really good emails does not follow best practices. The majority of it is image based. So Garin, I'm with you. Like, I just don't understand how you can be an industry leader, quote unquote, but then promote stuff that goes completely against the fundamentals of the industry you're in. But then, whenever the client wants you to break the rules, right? You want to always make the client happy. But a big part, what I've learned is what's been missing from a lot of this is education. A lot of people don't understand this stuff. They don't understand these basic fundamentals. They don't understand accessibility. They don't understand touch targets. They don't understand how important it is once you educate them. So every time we get a new client, we'll build a design system and we'll talk about, I'll go through and I'll talk about the education behind it. Right. And there's so much I want to say, and I'm just going to skip over it. But once they're educated, a lot of that, like kind of like subjectivity and stuff, it just kind of goes away. They're just completely on board, for the most part. There are some times where you have clients who are just so used to doing image based that they're like, and they have to test it, A/B testing and stuff. But when the client wants you to break the rules, you break the rules. And then if you understand, you really have to understand the fundamentals if you're going to break them. Like, you really have to understand the rules if you're going to break them, because then you can break them intentionally, right? You're not just breaking it just to be creative. You're doing it because you understand what you're doing.
You know how far over the line you are and exactly why you're over the line, right?
Exactly. But you still know, like, a big part of design with me is the way I approach a design. And this is any UI design or any type of accessible design is, and I always talk about cognitive science, but I can't remember the name of the rule, but it's like how you lead an eye through a design, right? And I'm going off on a tangent, but this is something I want to say because people don't really look at it this way. Whenever you look at a design, you want to look at each element as visually advancing into the foreground or visually receding into the background. And like your headlines, they should visually advance, right? You want that to pop and catch the user's attention. If you have a paragraph right below it, that should visually recede. It should still be accessible, but there are ways, like, you can, if you have a white background, you could do, I'm giving a very basic example, but you can have a black headline, you have dark gray text for the body copy, right? So that's going to make that paragraph copy visually recede into the background because that darker gray has less contrast than the black. So you're using contrast to pop things off the screen. And then also you're using contrast to have things visually recede into the background. If you understand like how to do that stuff and you start breaking the rules, that's totally fine. It's how do you want to lead the eye, right? Like, this is design, right? When I see a creative design, I don't always consider that creative, right? When I see an email that follows best practices and they cleverly created a solution that's completely out of the box, I'm like, that's an engineer, right? That's a design. That's a real designer. It's just, yes. So
I'm glad it wasn't just me, right? And I think that's why I did get so mad in that webinar is, hey, this is a very well-known organization whose whole raison d'etre is to showcase some of the best emails out there. And it's a lot of folks look up to you. They look at you for thought leadership, and you're literally leading them down the wrong path, right? And some of the attitude was more of it felt like the artist more in love with their art rather than the
Yes,
actual
yes,
purpose of the email
for
they were trying to.
themselves, right?
Yeah.
They're designing for themselves and not the user, right? And then it left me. It'll come back. But yeah, I'm with you, Gary.
Well, oftentimes that there's a distinction between selling to a customer directly, a B2C customer, and then a B2B customer and a B2B audience. What are some key differences you see in design there? Are there any differences in how you would approach email design between those two types of audiences?
So to me, it's like I would still follow the fundamental rules for both, regardless. Most of my experiences, it's in B2C, but you have user needs, which are B2C, right? The business has to meet the user needs, right? Or I saw a Venn diagram once, it had business goals, and then it had user needs, and in the middle, it had the product, right? You're merging the business goals with the user's needs. But anyway, same with the business, right? Like businesses have needs, they have pain points, they have the same thing. They're users, they're just, businesses. So from my experience, it's pretty much the same thing. Garin, I know you have I know you have a better answer than what I have, but yeah, that's what I have to say about it.
No, I think you said it all. I really don't think there needs to be much difference. I mean, it just like in B2C, it really comes down to sort of the brand, how they go to market, what's their ethos, and how do they represent that creatively or visually or graphically. In my experience, I feel like in B2C, maybe design takes more of a front seat. I think in the B2B world, to use your terminology, it sort of recedes into the background a little bit. It's certainly there, I think, to give a bit of brand feel and to provide that experience of sort of brand consistency and brand cohesion. But I tend to see the content coming forward a little bit more, specifically things like text, right? So more educational content, really trying to help people understand who this company is, what they do, how it's different or better, why that matters, and then use that as a launch pad to kind of help folks sort of build consideration and foster intent, right? But I don't see the B2B strategy for all of email, design included, being very different from B2C. Oftentimes, the timelines are a little bit longer. The customer journey and life cycles are a bit longer, simply because the products or services themselves tend to be much more expensive. They tend to be a much higher consideration purchase. And so the front stages of that journey, right? So sort of the welcome, the nurture, et cetera, getting folks to that point of decision tends to be a little bit longer. But outside of that, it shouldn't be any different. Like you said, George, I mean, customer experience comes first and should be first. And I don't think that changes whether you're in a B2B or a B2C side of the world.
I mean, it's the hierarchy of need, right? So in the hierarchy of content presentation,
yeah,
you have to do more explanation for a bigger purchase, regardless of whether you're selling to a business or to a customer directly, right? I mean, I was in the mattress world for a long time. Getting somebody to buy a $4,000 mattress is a lot harder than getting somebody to buy a $150 pillow, which is a lot harder than getting somebody to buy a $25 video game, which is a lot harder than getting somebody to buy a $2 candy bar. So, you have to adjust for that. Now, in B2C, you have the way we've set ourselves up as a channel, as an email channel, is we have offers to fall back on. So all people really care about, George, to your point, headline, I don't really care about the text. What's the offer?
Yeah, they're just scanning
it. And you know what? Scanning, business to business, you're still scanning, right? I mean, a number of emails, probably all three of us get in a day. We're like, what do you want? Nope. And we're out, right? So it's fundamentally, it's no different because it's still a person at the end of that email. The recipient's still a person. It's just that their needs in that particular inbox are going to be personal to their job, not personal necessarily to the rest of their life.
Yeah, it's all the same art. It's the art of moving people. I mean, that's really what we do in email, right? Is we exercise and perfect the art of moving people.
Yeah, and email is so ephemeral, I believe that's the word. It's just so short. You have a very short, like seconds, right? If even. So yeah, you just have to get it right.
It's a mosquito's life cycle, right?
That's a way to. Well, I think that we could spend another hour. We could talk. We could dive deep about hierarchy and all sorts of things. But we're at a good amount of time here, so let's just stop here. George, thank you so much for joining. But where can people find out more about you, and if they want to get in touch with you and feel the passion come out about design systems and user experience, how can they get in touch with you if you so desire?
Yeah, well, thank you both for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. And if people want to get in contact with me or find out more, just message me on DM. I just love talking about this stuff. I love accessibility, visual hierarchy, all the things that make up design and good user experience when it comes to UI design. So yeah, LinkedIn, George Pettigrew. I have a website. It's called pettypix.com. It's dated, but you can message me on there if you want. But yeah, those are the only two. I don't have a blog or anything like that. Just,
I hope that's Petty Pics, P-I-T-T-I, not pics. Otherwise, folks might think you're into foot images.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So you really got to nail that enunciation.
That's a very good point. Yeah,
it's the Nashville accent. He's got to really enunciate.
Yes, that's so true. Yeah, P-E-T-T-I-P-I-X.
There you go. Big difference. All right. Well, thank you so much again for joining us, George. And thanks to you, our listeners and watchers, for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about InboxArmy, check us out at inboxarmy.com. Till next time, be safe and be well, everyone.
Cheers all.